Good evening. After seemingly endless months of campaign promises, campaign speeches, negative advertising, the election is over. Tonight on Stay Tuned, we examined what happened on Election Day. We know who won, but did you win? Did our democracy win?
The female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
And I think women were shocked. Todd is Todd.
Well, I won't give a political answer.
This is not a government takeover.
I'm tired of the constant fighting of the Republicans and Democrats.
I tweeted at the presidential election watch party, hope you voted, your future depends on it.
47% Davis at 45%.
Twitter is way ahead of a lot of the MSNBC and CNN and stuff.
We're very excited, optimistic.
Is it really moving in the right direction?
We feel good about tonight.
I think Missouri voters are going to reward him with 4 more years.
Continuing to do this job and move this state forward.
Well, things don't always turn out the way you think they're going to.
Todd Akin was all the talk, but the Missouri Senate story now focuses on Claire McCaskill. Will this victory allow her to flex her moderate muscles in Washington? And what about the Republican Party?
And it is the most important election of our lifetime.
Some say it's time for a makeover.
It's unfortunate that we keep shooting ourselves in the foot.
Prop R passes, Prop B fails. What does this alphabet soup mean to you? And what about the billions of dollars spent to influence this election? Did it really make a difference to the outcome, to you? Tonight we're talking election impact. We're joined by citizens, experts, and journalists, including Hari Srinivasan of the PBS NewsHour. Stay tuned.
It's 6 a.m. and 27-year-old Justin Chick is already out the door, ready to vote.
I was anxious all yesterday.
Really?
Yeah.
Could you get to sleep?
No. No, I was up at 3.
Up bright and early to support the issues that matter to him. That's why he's not hopping in a car, but choosing to walk the 5 blocks from his house to the voting pool at Oak Hill Elementary School.
You here to vote, sir?
If this city is going to survive, we have to have strong public transportation. No doubt about it.
He holds a seat on St. Louis Mayor Francis Slay's Vanguard Committee, working to rid the streets of cars and get more people on bikes and buses. He hopes his vote won't just bring change to America, but also to the St. Louis region. He's one of the younger voters, but he's not uninformed. A website developer and blogger, Justin spends most days on his computer, writing about community issues such as transportation, and lately researching the election.
I've been paying attention to this for months.
But those months have got him, well, fed up with the campaign process.
The amount of money spent, at the national level, that's absolutely absurd. Another thing that frustrates me is just the amount of people who have opinions, but they're not ground in fact.
That has him wondering, has it always been this way?
Thank you very much for coming out.
63-year-old Michael Brown may have the answer.
As a little kid, I was out there at various polls, various things, being cute with my 2 sisters. And so this is just something I've done since I was very little.
6 presidential elections, 24 years. That's how long Brown has sat in this chair, greeting voters at Oak Hill Elementary.
I believe in the process, and so this is one of those things that I can do to help.
But Brown admits Justin is right.
You have a large population of just apathetic people.
I think the apathy has set in because so many people don't vote. It's, oh, the weather's bad, oh, it's cold, oh, my poll is someplace that, I don't like going there. So they just don't vote. And then they complain that, well, this is the wrong person.
This change has young voters like Justin questioning today's campaign process.
Who is this good for? It's not good for the people.
It's always tempting to go back to the good old days, the pure old days, but politics has always been a blood sport.
Bob Priddy of the Missouri Net, a statewide news network, describes it as swimming in a shark tank. A tank with thousands of politicians fighting to please the very different needs of thousands of people.
So that part of it doesn't really change. The faces change, the characters change, the political issues will change.
And those issues depend on who you talk to, especially in the St. Louis area. Look at Brown's beliefs, for example.
Right now, we can always use more jobs, but we're not getting a lot of.
Then there's the opinion of Terry Jones, the department chair of political science at the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Healthcare is the biggest issue that would have an impact on St. Louis. 1 out of every 8 St. Louisans works in the healthcare industry.
Now compare that to Justin, who doesn't drive a car but rides his bike to sustain St. Louis. For him, the coverage of issues often deemed most important, such as healthcare, versus the issues he fights for, has become frustrating.
It is unfair. You know, I mean, it's not as sexy. I mean, something like healthcare, that's important to everybody in the country, you know? In St. Louis pretty recently, it was, well, I've got a car, I'll get there. But that's not sustainable.
Jones says getting heard on such issues is different in 2012 than past years.
What you want to have are conversations occurring either face-to-face, that's the ground game, or through social media. And particularly for individuals who are 40 and younger, that's where the action is.
So while the politics of politics may frustrate him at times, Justin still believes in the system. He's one of the first people at the polls, well, besides Brown, of course. The two of them may seem different, one young, one old, one voting, one welcoming, but there are some similarities. They've both invested themselves in this election, and they both are ready to take a break until 2016.
That'll feel nice.
One way or the other, yes, I'm happy it's over.
For Stay Tuned, this is Joe Chiodo reporting.
A lot of our focus here tonight will be the local impact of this election, but we would be remiss not to talk about this election in a national context, and we have an excellent resource to do just that. From the PBS NewsHour, we are grateful to be joined by Hari Srinivasan. Hari, you've been waist deep in this election for some time, doing a lot of reporting. You've had a couple of days to reflect. Just off the top of your head here, I want to ask you just to give us a couple of themes that have emerged now that you've had a couple of days to kind of reflect on what you saw on Tuesday.
You know, you've probably heard it over the last couple of days, but really you saw a very clear choice between the candidates, and you saw at least the Republican Party having to go back and recalibrate itself to try to figure out exactly what went wrong, how they can improve. And then, you know, I was also focused on a frontline piece through this campaign, looking at big data and looking at specifically how the campaigns were using all this new technology and all this data. And it just astounds me how significant this was in the ground game in getting out those votes and how much more important it's going to be over time.
Okay, so before we lose anyone, including myself, big data. What do you mean by big data? And then expound on that for us.
Sure. So whenever we're online, whenever we're offline, we're basically generating information through our tastes and preferences. So people in campaigns have targeted voters or perfect voters, undecided voters for a long time. They've tried to figure out what kind of a magazine does he or she read, where do they live, how much do they earn, right? That information is fairly established and people can buy that. Well, this is the first election where campaigns could combine that with your surfing behavior, your browsing behavior on the internet. So imagine all of the data that you're generating anytime you surf the web. There's little cookies placed on your computer to go along, right? So now they're essentially buying a campaign to target you online and essentially stalk you wherever you go. And it's really smart, and they know that when you get a message from a friend of yours, perhaps on Facebook, you're gonna respond differently than if you get a message on a television, you know, just one of these negative ads that just keeps going over and over again. So this is the first time that both the campaigns have spent a fair amount of money and really invested in figuring out how to target you digitally.
Did one campaign do a better job at this than the other?
Well, I mean, the ultimate proof is what happens on Election Day, right? So it's the Obama campaign had a head start in that they knew who their candidate was going to be. So they had an in-house staff in Chicago working overtime for the past several years, whereas Mitt Romney had to survive all the other candidates, and then he sort of emerges at the top of the heap. Well, now he has to build out his national campaign. So he was operating perhaps from a disadvantage, but he also outsourced a lot of that. It wasn't really super centralized. And so he made up as much ground as he could. Both of these campaigns invested heavily in online video advertisements, because imagine if you could know exactly when the target user actually watched your ad, saw your ad, interacted with it, then you never have to give them that ad again. Unlike in TV, where you're buying 50, 100, 500 ads, copy after copy after copy, just hoping that somebody watches.
Hari Srinivasan, thank you, and stick around. We'd like to have you back later in the show in just a little bit. And if folks want to know more about this, some excellent reporting on Frontline you've done on this topic as well. Thank you very much, Hari. Hari will be back, and not only his voice, but yours too will be a big part of our show. To tell you how that happens, Ed Reggie is here. Ed?
Thanks. You actually out there are a critical part of tonight's conversation, whether you're watching at home or like our live audience right here in our studios. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what's missing in tonight's conversation. Now, there are several ways you can join in. I want you to log on our Facebook page, The 9 Network. We posted a question there earlier today. I want you to comment right below that, or you can tweet using the hashtag StayTunedSTL. And we'll be using these comments and conversations throughout the night.
Well, on election night, the 9 Network partnered with my home base, KSDK News Channel 5, for election coverage, and we had the pleasure of talking with former Senator John Danforth from Missouri about the election, and we wanted to share that with you again tonight.
The Republicans should be in much better condition than we are in the Senate, and it's unfortunate that we keep shooting ourselves in the foot.
A lot of Republicans changed their stance. They, at the last minute, he saw some support from the national level. You did not change your mind. Was that a hard decision for you?
No, and I understand the other point of view, which was this is the Senate seat, and people, particularly people who don't really agree with the Obama policies, think it's very important to have a Republican seat in the Senate, and I do too. But I thought that what was at stake here was more than just one seat in the Senate. I think it's the Republican brand. And we have to start trying to win elections by appealing to a broad cross-section of the public. And to go out of our way to offend large groups of people, I think, is not the way to do it. I voted, I vote the straight Republican ticket because that's what I am, but I may not have voted for that particular candidate. I may have written in somebody.
Senator Jack Danforth, we thank you for your time. We thank you for joining us tonight. Joining us tonight for our first Google Hangout is 3 people who can give us some insight on this Senate race and on politics in Missouri. Joining us tonight, first we have Chris McDaniel from St. Louis Public Radio. Chris is in the far bottom left. The man on the main screen, though, is Patrick Werner, Republican strategist, former director of Todd Akin's campaign at a former time, not this election cycle, we should point out. I'll pose a question to the both of you that I probably should have been more direct with the senator in that interview, and that is, did Todd Akin cost the Republicans a seat in the Senate?
He absolutely did. I think most people would have agreed that Senator McCaskill's seat was one of the most vulnerable, if not the most vulnerable, before Congressman Akin's comments concerning legitimate rape. That was pretty much the main issue of this race. If he hadn't made that comment, or if he wasn't selected in the primary, I don't think Senator McCaskill would have been back for another term.
I think everyone knows the comments you're talking about, but we should just be clear. He said, quote, legitimate rape. In those instances, a woman's body can somehow shut that down. I think that's ground we've all been over before. Patrick, same question quickly to you from the Republican perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you just looked at the polling data before the comment and then you looked at the polling data after the comment, then you saw the results. I mean, certainly that played a major role in the outcome of the election on Tuesday.
So does the Republican Party, what does this Senate race, if anything, tell you about, we heard the senator talk about the brand of the Republican Party. Does it need to change in Missouri specifically?
You know, it's the results in Missouri from me were just a monumental mixed bag. I mean, we go on and we elect Mitt Romney overwhelmingly, and then you go on and you look at the Senate race, and we lost that Senate race here in terms of a Republican position. But then you also look at and you go down the ticket, one Republican won, other Democrats won, but then we have super majorities in the Missouri House, we have a super majority in the Missouri Senate, and so it was just a complete mixed bag of results on Tuesday.
Does it have to?
I would push back a little bit on that, though. I wouldn't say it was a mixed bag. In terms of the statewide races, the Republicans did not do well. There was only one statewide race that they won, and that was Peter Kender besting Susan Monty in the lieutenant governor's race. And all of the other ones, Jay Nixon beat Spence by 12% for the governor. Attorney General's race, Chris Koster won by 15%. I think in terms of these statewide races, you have to appeal to a larger audience. And certainly, if you look at the composition of Missouri State House and the State Senate, you can afford to do a little bit less of that because you have a smaller district.
Okay,
for statewide races.
You don't have to work in IT to know that we've added a person to our Google Hangout. Let's welcome Jane Duker. And Jane, former chief of staff to former Missouri Governor Bob Holden. Jane, the topic, we were talking about you before you got here, so we're going to change the topic to something more pertinent to politics. Now, I'm kidding, of course. But the idea, does the Republican Party in Missouri, do they have some rebranding to do in the light of this past Tuesday's election?
I mean, I think they do. I think the idea that being extreme, even for Missouri, is not as palatable. And I think that we have a conservative Democrat ticket. They did very well in Missouri, and it's because they moved toward the middle. And I think that voters are now moving toward wanting people who will work across the aisle and who will be more moderate.
Patrick, and I don't disagree with what Jane just said. I mean, we actually saw in the governor's race in particular, in my opinion, if you were to move to Missouri back in September, a couple of months ago, and you just watched the gubernatorial ads, you would have thought there were two conservatives on the ballot. And from my perspective, with Americans for Prosperity, where I am today, I don't think either party really has a whole lot of time to sit back and try to figure out what their next move is. We have some major problems, a jobs crisis, a fiscal debt crisis. I think both parties need to address.
Going to Washington, returning to Washington for Claire McCaskill. What kind of power does she have? What does she take with her in her reelection? Does she have some influence in our Capitol?
I think she's going to have more power. I mean, she was already, she had a pretty powerful position, but now she goes back, in an important state, and she did it without the help of the national party in the sense that President Obama and Joe Biden did not come and campaign for her. So she doesn't really owe them anything. I think she's going to have a pretty powerful position.
Jane, you started to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's remarkable because I always thought that this election would be an interesting experiment because she ran on moderation. She ran on reaching across the aisle.
She ran away from the president.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that she ran away, but she surely didn't, jump all over and say I agree with him all the time. I mean, she defends her vote on Obamacare, and she's going to ensure that gets implemented and that stays where it is. But I also think that as a supporter of the president in the past, I do think she will have influence over policy. I think she will have influence within the executive branch, and I think that's good for Missouri. I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Jane, I agree with you. Seniority does mean a lot in the House and in the Senate at the federal level, and I do think she does gain some seniority after this re-election. And one of the things I'll be interested to see what she does because she ran as a real moderate, independent voice. We're going to have a debt ceiling vote that's going to take place before the end of the year. So I'm just curious to see how she handles that.
And I like her work that she's doing on government contracting. She's really doing well on the Truman Committee, going in there and looking at the executive branch that she is aligned with and rooting out, waste and abuse in all kinds of government agencies. I think that's a great place for her. She's very comfortable there, and I think she'll increase that work when she goes back.
Just like to point out, I believe Jane has a blue dog in her house, from what we can hear there.
Yeah, sorry.
Good one.
Hey, real quickly, I'm sorry, Chris. Come on, don't judge. It's my first show.
That was good.
That map came out today from USA Today that shows, not just a red state or a blue state, but it goes county by county, and not just in Missouri, but across the country. It's more urban versus rural. Your thoughts on that breakdown as it pertains to the Republican Party or either party?
Well, I think that again, I always talk about Missouri being a microcosm for the country. I mean, Missouri, even in my experience in state government, trying to unite Missouri between the urban and the rural has always been a challenge. And now that we're seeing that, nationwide, I'm not really that surprised. And I think it is going to take some leadership in reaching across the aisle and reaching across your safety zone to bridge that gap. But it's absolutely necessary. And so I do think the president had a very interesting and targeted strategy about what voters he was going to go after and how he was going to do that. But now it's time to unite.
Chris, do you see that when you're reporting? That
well,
divide?
I think Senator McCaskill did pretty well in rural areas in terms of, she actually won Greene County, which is pretty phenomenal for a Democratic candidate. But they do have different messages when they're in the city than when they are out in rural areas, and there is a divide. And if that's going to be, changed in any years, I don't know.
Well, and I think in tough economic times, it's harder to bridge the gap. So I think if, we start getting the economy rolling even further and, make further steps, creating jobs, then I think that split becomes less evident and less difficult to deal with. And so that's the challenge. And everybody ran on the idea that they were going to create jobs and jumpstart the economy. And I do think that will go a long way. But that map was interesting to me because it showed the preciseness of the Obama strategy in the election.
Chris, Patrick's trying to jump in. I'll give you the last word, Patrick.
Hey, Casey, just sort of jokingly, a lot of people want to change the electoral process. Maybe I'm suggesting that you get electoral votes based on the square mileage that you get across the country.
Okay. Well, on that note, we wish you luck with your constitutional amendment, and we thank you all for your time very much.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, a unique aspect of our show is we have some folks in the studio with us. You guys, I don't believe any of you are political consultants. None of you are journalists yet, but all of you voted. So we appreciate you being here and joining us for this conversation. Quickly, Sarah Thompson, John Pah, and Mr. Wilson, I just blanked on your first name.
Joe.
Joe,
okay.
I'm so sorry.
I won't hold it against you.
I'm so sorry. Well, I guess first, let me just open up the floor of the table, if you will. Anything jump out at you so far in our conversation tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things that was interesting, just as far as the whole McCaskill and Aiken, I mean, it is interesting to think that also the mixture of the Republican and Democratic winners or losers, and it's just, I think it is actually a huge statement to Missouri to say that, yeah, we voted for a Republican president. And then also voted for all these Democrats. It's fascinating to me, and we were talking about this before.
Yeah, go ahead. Well,
I'm just going to say that, yes, I've talked with a lot of friends of mine who are from the coast or from other places, and they laugh when people say, I'm liberal, but you're from Missouri, you're not. We're people who are supposedly liberal in this state, or Democrats, or whatever you want to say, are not nearly as bleeding heart or liberal or whatever, again, whatever you want to say. Yeah, exactly. We're not nearly as bad as the folks on the coast or in other places. It's just weird how different the party is.
I think
bad in quotation marks.
Yeah,
we're not as bad.
We don't want to alienate any of our audience on our first night.
Right. I think the questions that were raised beforehand were really good about rebranding the Republican Party. You know, I guess the question I always, when I do hear that, and I think Senator Danforth brought up a good point, though, it's like, can you rebrand a party that, in truth, doesn't necessarily feel the things that you're going to rebrand them as? So, I mean, if you are alienating women, minorities, Hispanics, and focusing solely on gay marriage and abortion, and you truly feel that way, you know, can you technically, from an advertising and a branding and a marketing perspective,
as a PR professional.
Yes, as a PR person, you can rebrand it. But the problem is people still feel so aligned to those views. So how can, I think, again, from all the pundits who are just talking, how can you sort of open up that dialogue, you know, and how can we get people who might be, which are a lot of conservative Democrats in this state, to not feel as offended by, personally, I think, by the Republican Party, at least how it operates in this state and on a national level.
Yeah, I would agree with you to a large extent. I guess the term I would use is there is a lack of discernment and leadership, I think, in the Republican Party. I mean, I think the McCaskill essentially, I don't think necessarily McCaskill won. I thought Aiken lost. I mean, that was kind of what I think most people would say. And it's because we see leaders as people who communicate well and are speaking for the public and for the people, and Aiken failed.
The other topic we brought up was kind of a little bit of an urban-rural divide. Yeah. Did that strike a nerve with you? I don't know if you saw this map, and I should have been more specific. It was the presidential breakdown, the voting, and really, you know, throughout every state where the urban cores are is where the blue is, and then everything else is kind of red. Does that bother you? Is that important, or has it always been that way?
You know, for me, I look at sort of my family. I look at my in-laws. I look at families that I just friends, and it is kind of scattered like that. Where my friends are in the urban area, who are especially down here in St. Louis, tend to lean a little bit more towards the left, and then you know, family and folks out in the urban areas tend to lean definitely towards the right. And it's really difficult to have a dialogue. It really is. And so I could not agree more. That does not surprise me. I mean, it really doesn't. I mean,
do you watch Fox News or not? You know, one thing. Go ahead.
No. So what about that dialogue, though? I mean, is compromise? You know, there's something to be said for a person who doesn't compromise their principles. But is compromise a dirty word now?
Well, what I thought was most interesting about all the guests that we just had, they all talked about how much, you know, people are going to be more moderate. There's going to be more consensus that has to be built. I want to know what makes them think that, because there's still a really deep divide in this country. All the electorate is tired of the deeply divisive politics, but I don't know if the politicians will ever stop doing that.
I will say one thing about the whole Aiken thing as well, is that the best part of his campaign to me was his concession speech.
I agree.
That was a great speech. And so that kind of posture needs to be more prevalent in the Republican Party.
All right, guys, we'll leave it there for now. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. We're coming back to visit some more. Thank you very much. Okay, we're back outside the studio, if you will. We're going to go back to Google Plus, do another hangout, and Hari is coming back to join us. The man you see right there, that is Jason Rosenbaum of the St. Louis Beacon. You know Hari from earlier, Srinivasan. I'm so proud of pronouncing your name correctly. I'm going to say it as many times. Okay, good. And Joe Mannies, also from the St. Louis Beacon. I'll start with our two Beacon reporters, and Hari, jump in anytime here too, all three of you. We talked a little bit about big data with Hari earlier. Talk about big money. There was $6 billion spent in the 2012 election overall. Did you see that in Missouri, and did it have an impact?
You saw it early.
You saw
maybe 10 or 12 million early. But after the infamous legitimate rape comment by Todd Aiken, all the outside money left. So then it became more of money between the two campaigns. We're talking about the U.S. Senate race.
The Senate race, yes.
And Claire McCaskill had raised far more. Overall, she'd raised over $12 million. She had about half of that by this summer. Akin never really had more than $1 million at a time. At the end, there was a little outside money that came in, about $1.5 million for him, but some of that was spent on robocalls. Some of it was spent on ads.
But not just the Senate race, Jason. What about did you see big money in Missouri elsewhere?
Yeah, that's an understatement, actually. Missouri has a distinction of being one of the few states that doesn't have campaign finance limits. And that means that somebody could give hundreds of thousands of dollars. When I say somebody, I mean one individual. And that happened numerous times throughout the election. But what we found was that just because somebody got a huge donation from somebody didn't mean that they were going to win an election. Two good examples are Brad Lager in the lieutenant governor Republican primary got a lot of money from a small circle of individuals, but still lost to incumbent Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder. And you also had an instance with the Secretary of State's race where retired financier Rex Sinquefield gave a lot of money to Republican Shane Scholler, but he was still defeated narrowly by Jason Kander. But there were other examples. For example, Sinquefield gave a lot of money to Attorney General Chris Koster, and he ended up easily beating Ed Martin, who received a lot of money from David Humphreys of TAMCO and lost a lot too. So my point being that big money can certainly help, but it's not necessarily a decisive factor.
Hari, what about on the national?
Did you guys
scale?
have a lot of super PAC? Did you guys have a bunch of super PAC money come into your state? I know it wasn't a battleground state per se, but was there a lot of outside spending?
Only for the U.S. Senate race. The stuff that Jason was talking about was just for our statewide candidates because there's no donation limits for the statewide candidates.
So that makes super PACs unnecessary because a lot of times they just donate directly to the candidates. That doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that they aren't needed as much from a tactical standpoint, like in the federal level.
Yeah, right. But as I mentioned before, on the federal contest, they spent about at least $10 million against McCaskill early, but then they bowed out after Akin's rape comment, and they, for the most part, didn't come back. Karl Rove didn't come back. He was only going to come back if Akin dropped out and there was a replacement Republican, and there never was.
You know, what's also interesting is that comment it went viral on the internet. You didn't have to pay for that ad. That was a piece of, beautifully shot video. All of a sudden, the next morning, there it is in your Facebook stream, your Twitter feed, or really even across old-fashioned newspapers. It's kind of like that there's no bad publicity except publicity, but it was out there and not a dime had to be spent on it.
Yeah, I will never forget the day coming back from celebrating my wife's birthday in Forest Park and looking at my phone and seeing how unbelievably viral that comment had gotten. I got 10 or 15 emails on a Sunday, which meant that, it had taken up another level, especially on places like Twitter and just everywhere else in the social media world. I'm sure Joe can attest because it kind of rocked her vacation over in rural Indiana as well. So,
what about the negativity in the ads? That was almost like running a negative ad on yourself, I suppose. Did it seem any more mean-spirited in 2012, nationally or locally, for any of you?
Well, locally, I would say it was a bit more nasty than in recent elections, but I've seen nastier. I have seen nastier elections. 20 years ago, there was an ad that had one of the gubernatorial candidates morphing into like horrible monsters that the other side put up. So I've seen nasty before.
Hari, nationally, would you say?
When you think about now post-election, we're hearing about how much President Obama's campaign initially spent on those $10 to $50 million to help define Mitt Romney as a Bain Capital guy.
Right.
Well, when you think about all of that money spent versus the 47% comment, which is a piece of video from a hidden cell phone, right? I mean, that could be probably the most consequential piece of video in this election if it helped somebody make up their mind about Mitt Romney one way or the other.
And one thing that I found especially interesting is these super PACs, which were basically created just to run negative ads with effectively unlimited donations, they weren't particularly successful in many instances. There was tons of money spent on the Illinois congressional race in the 12th district to help Jason Plummer from a lot of these super PACs. And he ended up losing pretty decisively to Bill Enyart in what I felt was a nastier contest than pretty much any I saw in Missouri.
Hari, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off, Jason. I'm sorry. Hari, Jason, Joe, we thank you for your time. We have to stay on our time. I appreciate your insights. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I like what we were just kind of getting into there for a second. The idea that you spend all this money and then something that happens organically, to use an overused word, maybe has more impact. And tying that in with what Hari talked about in the beginning of the program, how much effort is going in to communicate through Facebook. Is this what every business is trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know that. I mean, this is the whole story of how sort of public relations versus advertising things develop, is that people believe seeing stories firsthand. They trust journalists, let's say, more than they would an advertisement, or people like seeing video or hearing the actual words, and that has more effect than seeing an ad. So, and that's even saying that is kind of that's a hard thing to say. But yeah, it's true. So, but yeah, the money spent. I can only sum it up with my mother, who I won't even mention her age, to say, all this money could have been spent to help people for Hurricane Sandy, but it's really sad when you see that it's like $100 billion and millions of dollars for web ads and this and that. I mean, it has a point, but yeah, it's tough when you look at all the other things going on, not just in this country, but in the world.
Does that bother you? By the way, for those who don't know, John, they may have seen your video on the web, which also went viral. You made a kind of Why We Love St. Louis video. It was beautifully shot and well received and made the rounds really quickly on Facebook. Is the viralness, is that something they can manufacture, or does that just happen to be good luck or bad luck in Mr. Akin's case?
I mean, I would say some people can manufacture it. You see that, what's that Gangnam Style guy? I mean, I'm pretty sure that was manufactured.
Right. Does the money bother you? The money that was spent, we're talking about $6 billion across 2012?
I would say it bothers me, yes. It's just a lot of money. I mean, you look at this and you think, wow, and it's only going to grow. It's only going to grow. And they would help my businesses, but at the same time, I'd say that, it is what it is. Joe.
I'm going to cut you off and turn it local for just a second, because that's where we want to get to. So the transition is on you, my friend. But no, we had a few local issues in St. Louis and in Missouri that were propositions. Prop R, for instance, we're going to reduce the size of our board of aldermen.
I think it's awesome. I'm excited to hear that. I really like that. 28 aldermen is an awful lot of people to try and build consensus with for a city that is really divisive in a lot of ways, north and south, or however you want to look at it. So reducing the board of aldermen, I think, is one way that we could probably make things a little bit better in town.
It's going to go to 14. Not everybody was excited about this. They like to be able to pick up the phone and call their alderman. They're worried that's going to go away.
It's revolutionary. I mean, I think it's going to be revolutionary for our city. It's scary. I'm sure a lot of people are. I'm a little scared. I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, I think there's some people, I think they had made valid points. I think there are going to be people, some people who hurt, people who really, in certain communities, relied on their alderman, alderwoman for not things like picking up the trash, but really serious issues as it relates to crime. So I think in certain neighborhoods, certain wards, it's going to hurt. But
the responsibilities haven't changed. They still have to care about those things. They still have to do that.
I'm just saying I was in support of it. I will say that. Yeah. But in hearing everything out, there was a lot of, I think Alderman French brought up some good points. There's just a lot of valid points. I will say it wasn't an easy thing, because I think there's some valid points brought up, though. I will say that.
Prop B quickly went down. That was to increase the tax on smoking a pack of cigarettes. That went down. Were you surprised?
I actually said that earlier. I was actually surprised. I thought it was going to inch its way through. I just, I get the whole thing about imposing taxes, but I thought it was going to make its way through.
Gas stations were worried that could really hurt their business. I mean that in all seriousness. That was their campaign. Never going to pass.
I didn't think it was ever going to pass.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your time, and we appreciate your insight. Thank you very much. Another piece of tape we have for you tonight gives us another perspective that we were able to capture on Tuesday night with the founder of the St. Louis American, Donald Suggs.
I think that the African American community has to depend on the economic vitality in the city, and I do think we have to become more competitive as a city, as a region. So I do think having a smaller number of wards might improve our opportunities to move ahead economically, and I think that ultimately has benefit for the African American community. Younger people tend to be more open to the idea of some reform, taking a larger view. Some of the older officials, community leaders and elected officials seem more worried about disturbing the status quo, but that's understandable.
Mr. Suggs, they're talking about what we were just speaking about, Proposition R, which will reduce the St. Louis Board of Aldermen from 28 down to 14 in about 10 years. Okay, now let's go back to the Google Plus Hangout. We have with us Jim Kircher from the 9 Network. You also know Joe from Harry Potter. No, I'm sorry. She just has an amazing stack of books behind her back there from the St. Louis Beacon. And keeping calm and carrying on is Alex Enan, blogger you will know as Next STL. Alex, you're on the big screen. Let's jump in with you. I know Prop R is something that you were passionately for. Your thoughts post-election, and also specifically, it wasn't that long ago, I can remember covering a story where this was first introduced, and it really seemed to move fast from an idea to a passing proposition.
Well, we have to remember that this effort failed many times, 1957, 81, 83, 2004. So this is a long time coming, and something that a lot of people have thought was necessary for literally half a century. So it's a big deal. And I think what it will put in place is changes that will actually change the structure of what an alderman does, which I think is really probably the more important issue in the city.
And I know you believe it will also help with the communication at City Hall too, inside City Hall.
Well, I think what it'll do is show that aldermen need to do more legislating for the city. They're the ones who need to tell us what's important in the city, what's the direction of the city, what's the plan for the city. And currently they deal with, trash pickup and down trees. And there are methods to deal with that in other places. And I think one thing that really stood out for me that still hasn't been talked about very much is that, St. Louis stood alone, far and away, having the largest number of representatives per resident, for a city of its size anywhere in the country. So, if we were Chicago, I mean, they're legendary for having 50 aldermen, but they represent 4 times as many residents as an alderman in the city of St. Louis. And so, what was missing in the conversation is that other cities have found a way to provide services, whether it's trash or, other issues that our aldermen deal with all the time. And so the reality is our aldermen should not be doing that. And they need to be legislating. They need to be representing the city and building a better city.
Joe and Jim, let's talk. I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead. I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump right in because I've been thinking a lot about this. And very often, I think, historically speaking, the current Board of Aldermen setup was part of the reforms of a long time ago. And I think when the city looks at these things, it's usually for one of 2 reasons, either to get rid of corruption or to improve efficiency. And back in 1914 and before that, we had 2 houses. We had a strong mayor and we had 2 houses in the city hall, a board of aldermen and city council. And, so they moved to do some things. But I think over the years, we've looked at these reforms in terms of how do we improve that in terms of modern times and how do we do that moving forward. I think the maybe the really smart piece of this was to put it 10 years off.
Jim, you look remarkably well for having covered City Hall in 1914, I must say. Let's go statewide a little bit and back to what we were just talking about at the table, Prop B. Joe, this is not the first time we've tried to raise taxes on cigarettes. Were you surprised at the outcome?
Not entirely. They have put this on the ballot twice before. It's lost narrowly twice before. And all three times, the opposition mounted the same kind of campaign. They had these little placards on top of gas pumps saying that there was like a $7,000 increase, a 7,000% increase, something like that.
Right, 760%.
Correct, but the point was that the people getting their gas then think it has something to do with their gas.
Yeah.
And and they also had pretty effective TV ads. I think the supporters, for whatever reason, have never been able to come up with a strong enough campaign and enough ad money to really counter that, because the way the opposition has killed it has been the same campaign every time.
We have about 45 seconds left here. I want to switch to one other topic, and that is, for the first time in, I believe, 150 plus years, St. Louis will now have control of its police department. Alex, what were your thoughts on this passage?
Yeah, well, I think with a lot of things, I mean, we're just frankly behind good government practices here. I mean, it's St. Louis, and now Kansas City is the only city left that doesn't control its own police department. And I understand that locals claim that, if you put the city in charge of it, there's going to be corruption and there's chances for things to go wrong. But frankly, we've got to start somewhere. So we have to bring the police force back into the city and deal with what comes. But we have to start with that. So it's a great thing that passed.
These things have been talked, and Joe, you know this, they've been talked about for years and years. I think it's pretty remarkable that these two city-directed propositions passed in the same year, and you have to be thinking about what's next on the reformers' mind. County offices, strong mayor, re-entry into the county. I think all of these things, will enter in the conversation now.
We'll leave it there for now. We thank you all for your expertise and for your time. We appreciate it. And of course, there are a lot of issues in this past election that were not St. Louis centric. We sent our Stay Tuned team out into the rural parts of our great state of Missouri.
You're a watcher. Opinions are a dime a dozen around a place like this.
I am real turned off by politicians, especially when they sit there and badger each other. Tell me what you're going to do for me. Tell me what you're going to do for the country. But don't sit there and tell me what this other person's doing. I don't care what you think of this other person. I want to know what you have to offer.
There's been people in the White House that were scumbags. That's a tough term, but I mean, that's honestly my opinion.
Surprised I haven't seen him on Dancing with the Stars. I mean,
Less talk and more action. I think one of the main topics that needs to happen is they need to figure out how to fix this nation.
Go to work. Take that damn suit off, roll your sleeves up, and go to work. Quit talking to us about it and do something.
We have to make changes, and I'm not going to tell you how or what those changes need to be or how to get there. I know what they should be, but I don't know necessarily how to get there. I'm just one little cog in the wheel.
I'm pleased to be joined now by Terry Jones, political science professor from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, to give us a little context on our conversation that seems to have flown by here in the studio tonight. But what stands out to you so far tonight in our conversation?
That this generation, those in their 20s and 30s, see TV ads as so 20th century. And so, yes, they are appalled at the amount of money being spent on them. It's not simply the money itself, it's the waste, because it's not doing anything for them. They're communicating in an entirely different way.
So the campaigns have wasted that money on 30-second spots that they're fast forwarding through on their DVR.
If they see them at all.
Okay, so what do campaigns not only have to do to reach them, but to maybe kind of regain their confidence and regain their trust a little bit? I think we're all very cynical at times about our leadership.
We continue to be cynical, but the more personal, more individualized messages that come through the Facebook and the Twitter and the other social media, and things that happen seemingly naturally, and you, I think, at one point used the word organic. That's the new style of communication. It really came through tonight as you listen to these young people.
We started the conversation tonight with Hari talking about something that I think is new to a lot of people, this idea of not just big money, but big data. Is that, turns out maybe Big Brother is not the government, it's those who want to be in the government.
Well, Big Brother, of course, is Google on steroids. That's happening throughout the marketplace. So it's not simply government and voting, but if you go on Amazon, it already knows all the books you've already bought, and it suggests some other books that would be like them.
Okay, so we talked a little bit in the beginning. It's a subject that's been talked about a lot, not just in this state. But go back to Todd Akin, if you will, briefly. What did he, if anything, did he cost the Republican Party a seat there? And if so, what does that mean for the Republican Party?
Well, the Akin combined with the Murdoch in Indiana, combined with Nevada, Colorado, and Delaware in 2010, meant the Republicans, if everything had gone normally with more centrist candidates, would be in control of the U.S. Senate now. Instead, the Democrats are.
Take Akin's comments out of this election. Did they misread what people are looking for in a Republican Party?
They certainly put up their worst candidate in terms of competitiveness against a very endangered incumbent.
And then going forward, Claire McCaskill goes back to Washington. What do you see for her career in this next 6 years?
Well, there's more turnover in the U.S. Senate, so you rise more rapidly within the leadership. Claire McCaskill is a very outspoken and committed senator. I see her as being one of the top 10 to 15 power players within the U.S. Senate over the next 4 to 6 years.
Talk about that map we brought up earlier. I keep saying we, I guess I brought it up, but everyone else seemed to enjoy talking about it, so we'll go with it. The blue and red, not on a state-by-state basis, but on an urban versus rural basis, is that something that we've always had in this country, or is it getting more divisive?
We've always had it, but it is getting more divisive. And we also have secular versus observant. We have young versus old. We have black versus white, or people of color versus white. The divisions demographically are sharpening rather than coming together.
Can two parties handle all of that diversity?
Not when those individuals or those segments identify very closely with one party other than the other. So if you interact party to party, if you don't see many people like you in the other party, you're less likely to see that party as having some legitimacy in the debate.
So how about that divide in rural versus urban? Is that something that we have to be worried about, or is that something that we just live with? Is that a weakness as a society?
We are becoming weaker, more dysfunctional in terms of our government. I think one of the books that captures this very well is called "It's Even Worse Than It Looks," and it is even worse than it looks.
Okay, so then how would you fix it if I gave you the magical political wand?
That we somehow get back to a point where there are conservatives who are Democrats and where there are moderates who are Republicans, more of each, and that would enable a more meaningful conversations across the party lines.
We're coming up on what we have decided as a country to call the fiscal cliff, where our nation's leaders have to compromise, or we're going to see higher taxes and drastic spending cuts, assuming they don't change the rules of this trap they've set for themselves. Are you at all optimistic that we're going to see compromise in our politics nationally? And then I'll ask you about the state.
First, the fact that we have to have a cliff before we even have this ability to find a compromise says something about where we are right now. Because it's such a steep cliff, there's a necessity that they get something done. Whether that's going to be papering over and this gets us 6 months or 12 months into the future, or whether it's going to be real compromise, that's the issue. What
about at the state level? There's a very strong hold on the state legislature from the Republican side. We have a Democratic governor who ran a very conservative campaign by all measures, I would say. Do you see, the governor said there was a lot of compromise and he worked across the aisle. I guess first, do you believe that?
In his first term, Governor Nixon accepted the reality that he was facing a Republican General Assembly and by and large worked well with them. He's going to have an even bigger challenge in the second term because it's now a veto-proof House and a veto-proof Senate, which is to say there are more than 2/3 of each body are Republicans and they can override a gubernatorial veto, which lessens the governor's ability to get things done, lessens his ability to negotiate.
Are they elected from areas that demand some working across the aisle, or are the districts in the state at the state level drawn up in a way that they don't have to compromise?
Well, again, it's the urban-rural showing itself in the General Assembly, and compromise is very difficult.
Is compromise a dirty word? When did that happen, if so?
Well, it's interesting. In the polling that's been done, we didn't even ask that question as polling until the last few years. And for about half of Americans, it is a dirty word.
We'll leave it there. That's maybe we have some soul searching to do as a citizenry. Terry Jones, University of Missouri St. Louis. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here on Stay Tuned. We appreciate your time.
And we could see on that last tweet that we just got from Kara Hartwig, can we talk about the fact that maybe Missourians value more tobacco than education? And I think that's what we heard a lot of tonight. Do people's values come across in these election results? I mean, what do people really care about?
And they seem to be picking teams, as we all know, and we're not really sure how that changes or if it will and if it when. We thank you. We thank you for being with us tonight, and we hope you'll stay tuned. Rallies like this one in Wentzville are popping up all over our region, trying to combat a threat that claimed more than 200 lives locally just last year, one that isn't even on the radar for most of us.
People think it doesn't affect everybody. It does.
It's easier for kids to get right now than it is for them to get a six-pack of beer, and it's even cheaper.
We don't learn about it that much at school.
It was new to us. I mean, we didn't know until they knocked on our door and let us know she was gone.
Thursday on Stay Tuned, we'll explore the heroin epidemic and how our community is starting to fight back against this dangerous drug. Until then, stay tuned.